Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Chargers Analytics with Arjun. And this is going to be sort of my season preview episode for the Chargers' keys to success to be a Super Bowl contender, and not only to be a contender, but to win the Super Bowl, right? Like I don't think I'm the only Chargers fan or even NFL fan who believes the Chargers are legitimate contenders this year. They have the sixth highest odds to win the Super Bowl, mostly around 1,400 to plus 1,500 to plus 1,600 on most books. So really excited, obviously, for the team this year, and I think they've done a tremendous job of building an offense around Justin Herbert and a defense that fits what Staley wants to do. Now, I'm sure this type of episode you guys have probably heard on different podcasts or read about it on different blogs or seen different articles about it by like ESPN or PFF. But trust me when I say this, like I don't think anyone will have the stats or the data breakdowns like I will in this episode. So I do think it's worth a watch and to give you guys just like a better understanding of like how I think about football and ways that you guys can think about football as well. I'm not saying the way you guys think about football is wrong. I just want to present a different view. Obviously, I come from more of a analytical background. So let's start with the Chargers keys to success. I kind of rank these by in importance the way I see it. So number one is a top five offense, right? The Chargers last year were a top five offense. They didn't lose anyone of importance except Andre Roberts. They improved the right guard spot, and there's still a position battle at right tackle, which I'll get to in a second. But the Chargers have continuity all across the board on the roster and the coaching staff, except for Frank Smith. I fully expect this team with a healthy Justin Herbert and at least some healthy weapons to be a top five offense. And this is why, right? Like this is a graph by my friend Tage Seth at Tage FB Analytics. One of the better graphs to illustrate how important it is to have a good offense over a good defense. Every single team since 2011 that has made the Super Bowl has had at least an above average offense. And a majority of these teams have had top five offenses as well. Highlights the importance of not only being able to move the ball at will, but also put points on the board, right? So the offensive and defensive ranks aren't by like yards per game or points per game. Remember, I like to use EPA, stands for expected points added, basically measures how if you're getting closer or further away from the goal line. It's just a better measure of offensive efficiency than yards per game or points per game, which is kind of deterred by some other contextual factors that EPA takes into account. So again, having a top five offense is super important, which is kind of related to having at least an above average defense or average at the worst. And the Chargers last year, we can all say we were a bottom 10 defense. I don't even think the run defense was like the run defense is obviously the biggest problem, but I don't think people are talking about how bad the pass defense was, which everyone thought would be a strength of the team, right? And it's not that the corners weren't healthy. Even when the corners were healthy, guys like Michael Davis were having bad years. Chris Harris Jr. I mean, there's a reason he hasn't signed with an NFL team yet. He says he has five teams interested, but none of them have signed him yet, right? Like he didn't really have that great of a year last year. So again, having an average defense is important. A majority of the teams that have made the Super Bowl have at least had above average defenses, and it doesn't really need to be that important to have a top five defense, right? Only five teams, no, sorry, only six teams have had a top five defense since 2011 and made the Super Bowl. Using EPA per play as a measure of defensive efficiency. So not too worried if the defense shows up in like the 8 to 12 range. They just can't be a liability again for another season. The next thing, right tackle, right? Like I know this point has been harped on all off season. If you listen to any Chargers podcast and they haven't brought this up, they're probably not talking about the right Los Angeles Chargers. But the thing about right tackle is it just can't be a liability. Like I would take if Storm Norton or Trey Pipkins give us average play, that's enough for me. And this is why. So one of the things we've been doing at PFF is looking at the idea of like weak link units. What a weak link unit means is you're only as strong as your weakest link, right? It's kind of like the basis for any team building exercise or anything you learn in like when you're growing up. So this was a study done by my fellow intern and friend Judah Forking at Throw the Damn Ball on Twitter. Basically, what it's saying is EPA or offensive efficiency in general gives you marginal positive returns up to a certain point. So the x-axis here is looking at successful blocking. This just means the player received either a 0 or a positive grade on the play by the PFF graders. And the y-axis is EPA as a result. So what this is showing is going from bad to average gives you a positive marginal increase in EPA. And the result is almost linear, which is a good thing. But once you go from average to good and good to great, there's diminishing returns, right? So for my listeners here who have studied econ, you probably understand this well. But basically, for the econ people, this is just saying going from bad to good is important. Going from good to great is important, but it doesn't really net you as big of a return. So in relation to the Chargers, think of Storm Norton and Trey Pipkins as the bottom of this line. And average is this point right here where successful blocking is equal to 90%. Okay. So going from awful to average, the Chargers get about about 0.07 expected points added better, right? That's a pretty big jump, and that's an important jump. If the Chargers can get average offensive tackle play and go from awful to average, that's all we need. That's all we're asking for. And if they can go to becoming above average, that's even better. But we have to temper our expectations. So it's not really about Storm Norton and Trey Pipkins being bad. It's more like how much of a liability are they? Because even if we get slightly improved play from Storm Norton, that's going to improve the offense as a whole. And I also think we need to be realistic in the fact that we're probably going to suffer at least some type of injury. I'm not wishing any injury on any player, but there is going to be some type of injury along this offensive line. So the type of liability or how much worse we get at that position is also going to be important. And if we lose someone like a Rashawn Slater, Corey Linsley, who are elite in this type of metric, we would see decreasing margin, or we would see negative returns in terms of offensive efficiency, just because no one's as good of a pass blocker on this team as Linsley and Slater. Next, wide receiver 3 situation. I think this is pretty straightforward. I think if the Chargers can get a third reliable receiver, they're pretty much the fourth option in the receiving game behind Keenan, Mike, and Eckler. But getting a reliable receiver 3 also signifies that we can handle a potential injury to Keenan or Mike, and we can have someone like Josh Palmer, Jalen Guyton, or DeAndre step in without any breakdown or misstep in the offense going forward. But one of the studies we've done at PFF is the importance of secondary receivers. So basically, this is saying especially in the playoffs, the amount of secondary receivers you have, it's more important at some point to have quantity over quality, if that makes sense. You want to have more receivers that can get open than one elite receiver that can get open. Now, the Chargers are lucky enough to have 2 guys who are pretty good in their craft with Keenan and Mike. So this wide receiver 3 situation isn't super important, but I do think it's important to have this type of backup plan in case one of them goes down. And also, if guys like Jalen Guyton and DeAndre Carter can be used in roles, not just for gadget roles or deep ball throws, because you don't want to be one-dimensional like that when they're on the field. So I did think this was an important key that the Chargers need to sort out, but I think they've been doing fine in training camp, so not as big of an issue. Depth and quality in the secondary. So this is an important one, and this is a study I did at PFF, which I'm going to show here. So one of the things we looked at is this idea of a perfectly covered play. As you can see in the caption, or my face might be blocking it, but basically, as the number of negatively graded players on a play increases, the offense becomes more efficient. And that's just standard thinking, right? So basically, what I define as a perfectly covered play is when every single player on the defense that is in coverage records a grade of 0 or positive, which means they all did their job or they did their job better, right? They either perfectly cover the receiver or they receive a neutral grade. So when that happens, the offense averages about a negative 0.33 EPA per play, which is awful, which means they lose about 3 points every single time the defense perfectly covers a play. Now, thankfully for offenses, this idea of a perfectly covered play doesn't happen as often as a broken coverage, which is what you see with the amount of plays that happen each time. So how this relates to the Chargers is last year they were playing in a pretty complex scheme, right? The corners, and that's why the Chargers needed to go out and sign players who knew the scheme. Devontae Harris, Essang Bassey. Both of them are not very good cornerbacks. They're replacement level, below replacement level cornerbacks, if we're being completely honest. So the amount of times that you could have this type of negatively graded play, or not just negatively graded play, the amount of times the Chargers had more than one person mess up on a play was pretty big. And they struggled at times in coverage, which is why teams generated a lot of explosive plays against them on the ground and in the air, which isn't something that Staley is necessarily known for, or a Fangio Staley type defense. So this takes me to my next table, which is the best and worst cornerback trios at this of perfectly covering a play, right? So basically, these are the best corners at all getting a grade of 0 or better on a play since 2019. And our guys, Chris Harris, Michael Davis, and Tavon Campbell, show up in the bottom 5. They only perfectly covered a play on 43% of their plays, which ranked in the bottom 5. And they had a decent enough sample size of from 2020 to 2021 and from 2019 to 2021 and 2021 to 2022, or 2020 to 2021 and 2021 to 2022. As a tongue teaser, but yeah, like the Chargers with this cornerback trio were terrible, and obviously Asante was in there sometimes, but I mean, the cornerbacks last year were not that good, and I think we definitely have an upgrade with J.C. Jackson and Bryce Callahan, and a lot of the metrics we've been building at PFF and coverage has shown up at number 1. He's been either number 1 or in the top 10. So I'm really excited to see the Chargers in this metric next year. But yeah, I think depth, not only just depth, but the quality of their top 3 guys and them staying healthy is important, because you want to have more of these plays where everyone does their job and the offense takes a step back rather than have an explosive play. Staying aggressive on 4th downs, right? Like Brandon Staley had a great press conference, basically said his mindset on going for 4th downs. It's mostly a feel, but he also likes to tie in data, which is fine, right? Like not every coach or no coach is going to say I just use the data, because I think you do need to have a bit of a feel for it. But it's good to see that he's still aggressive, because the Chargers last year had the fourth highest rate of 4th downs that they should have gone for it, and they did, which is obviously a great thing to see. And have other really smart teams like the Packers, the Colts, and the Browns up there. And so the Chargers have done a good job of taking advantage of these small edges that can be found on going for it on 4th down. They did that last year, and I know for sure they're going to be doing it this year, because they have Brandon Staley and they have a lot of smart people in that organization. And finally, throw often and early. This should be a bombs away offense, right? Like, I'm not saying throw the ball deep. I'm not saying throw the ball short every single time, but you want to throw often and you want to throw early. This is the Chargers breakdown of their pass rate or pass frequency over expected. So to decipher this, basically, Ben Baldwin, who's an NFL analytics guy, basically created a model that created the probability that a pass would occur. And if a pass does occur, you take 1 minus the probability that Ben Baldwin's model said the pass would occur, and you get the over expected. So the Chargers basically threw the ball more than expected on every single type of situation there is, except 3rd and 1 and 2, which is fine, right? Like, because the thing with 3rd and 1 and 2 is half of these 3rd and 1s are actually 2nd and 1s, because the Chargers are going to go for it in 4th and 1 or 4th and 2, even if they lose a yard. So I'm not too worried about them being negative here. Honestly, it's fine, but you like to see Chargers having a 5% pass rate over expected on 1st and 10. And, across the board, they were just overall throwing more than expected, which is what you want, which is what they should be doing with a guy like Justin Herbert, who can sustain a high volume of throws, unlike other quarterbacks who you may need to run the ball a little bit more because they don't have the arm to throw deep all game, or they don't have the arm to sustain the type of volume that Justin Herbert had. Now, throwing often does not mean late in games when you're trying to grind out the clock, you should always be throwing. That's a different scenario, right? But like when you're in a neutral game script, or you're ahead or behind by 1 score, I think you should, with Justin Herbert, be trying to achieve the optimal pass run ratio, which I think is closer to like 70-30 or maybe 65-35%. And the Chargers have done a great job of that last year, and I'm really excited to see how this continues next year. So those are my keys to success. That's what I think the Chargers need to hit on to make it back to the Super Bowl. Obviously, there's going to be other things like staying healthy, which is the common thing for every single team. But that's just out of their control. Like sometimes you can't really facilitate health. Obviously, having a great sports science staff like the Rams will help there, but not every team has access to that. So this is things the Chargers can control, and places where I hope they develop, and I hope they are able to stay consistent, especially like with fourth down play calls or fourth down decisions, and passing often and early, and being an overall good offense, which I have a lot of faith in this offensive staff and a lot of faith in these offensive players that they can make that happen. But if there's any other keys to success you guys think I missed, I think I highlighted all the major ones, but I didn't want to get into too much of the nitty gritty with this. But leave a comment if you think there's anything I missed, and I'll be happy to check it out, reply to it. But thank you all for listening to this video. And with that, as always, bolt up.